Even though NASA isn't what it used to be in the 50s, in the Apollo age, we're already preparing for like the next age, like the Mars age. So I think it's different now, but it's also a new age of excitement for things that we haven't done before.
Today I'm joined by a longtime friend of Design Lab, Sirina Nabhan, who works for one of the coolest places in the universe. Sirina is a product and data systems engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. After graduating from UC Riverside, Sirina landed a 3-month internship at NASA. Then, a few years later, they brought her on for real. These days, Sirina's role is to build project and data systems in deep space networks, basically communicating with anything that goes to the moon and beyond. Today, we'll talk about how a robot video on YouTube inspired her career path, what's happening between NASA and JAXA, the Japanese space program, and what we can expect to see in the near and distant future when it comes to deep space communication. We live in a time where design and technology touch every aspect of our lives. But where did it all come from? Who designed it? How was it built and brought to market? What will it look like in a year? 2 years? 100 years? From the phones and smartwatches that help us in our day-to-day to the cutting-edge spaceships and 3D printers that are leading us into the future, modern design is constantly shaping the way we work, communicate, problem solve, and play. And every new design, big or small, starts with an idea and a bill of materials. I'm Magenta Strongheart, and this is The Bomb, where we talk to leading innovators in the tech world and celebrate the transformational power of design. Welcome to The Bomb, Sirina. I'm so excited to have you here, and we're just catching up about your trip to Japan, so we're definitely going to get into that later today. Thanks for coming to the lab today for The Bomb.
Thanks for having me.
And so just for those who don't know, Sirina is a project data systems engineer at NASA JPL and a huge, I don't even know what to say, like friend of the frame is kind of how we put it, right? You've been in the fold for a while now. You've been a Hackaday Prize judge several years in a row. You spoke at our Hackaday Prize summit this year, which was awesome. And you've just helped us with projects here. Yeah, fangirl, love that. I mean, that's an honor to say like JPL engineer is a fangirl, Design Lab, love it. And we first met at, I was trying to remember, one of our early Hackaday LA events, I think. You and Sarah spoke later on, but I think we first just met as you were an attendee, right?
Yep, right here at the Design Lab.
And then we just recruited you into things and never let you go.
Yes.
As always, as those things tend to happen. So I'd love to just get started with a little bit of your background, how you got into engineering, from even we can go all the way back early age, what was your inspiration or when did you first get interested in engineering through kind of your education and, now being at JPL. So.
Okay, well, I'd love to say that, I had this epic story of someone bringing me into the engineering world, but it really all started with a YouTube video. I saw a Boston Dynamics YouTube video that a friend showed me, and it was a robot that was, tracking through the forest, and it's this company that I saw and I said, I want to be part of that. I want to do that sort of thing. At that point, I was actually already in community college, majoring in mathematics, just because I didn't know what I was going to do. But after I saw that YouTube video, I was like, I want to be a robotics engineer.
That's when it clicked.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, I wish it was some epic story, but it's also a beautiful modern story of how the internet can really just open up a career path for someone
Absolutely.
That may not have seen it otherwise. Yeah. So I chose my major to be in electrical engineering because I was interested in robotics. However, once I got into college, I was taken all kinds of directions, got into material science, embedded systems, all sorts of things. But after graduating, I had used my internship experience to get my job at JPL, which is in RF communication as it started, and now it's in systems engineering. So in my role, I translate project needs into our software lifecycle, building the project and their data systems into the Deep Space Network, which is a network of antennas that are placed all around the world. The most massive antennas that are communicating with anything that goes to the moon and beyond.
Amazing. And Deep Space Network, I have really learned mostly about through you and your work there, because I honestly didn't know much about DSN before you started working on it. I would love to get a little more in depth how the data that's collected with the, network of antennas aids projects around the world, because I know that you guys collaborate with a ton of different institutions with other missions, both public and private, I'm pretty sure. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about kind of how does the work you're doing kind of apply to all these different projects?
Sure. Again, just for some historical background, the Deep Space Network was initially set up during the Apollo age because they needed something to communicate so far. Before that, we had smaller ground station antennas. And even today for Earth orbiting missions, internet satellites, things like that, we have the Near Earth Network. So the Deep Space Network is utilized for any mission trying to go to the moon and beyond, as I said. But they are a servicer to over 40 different flying missions now. We have almost 20 missions coming up, including CubeSats, manned missions, and woman missions also. First woman on the moon pretty soon. So they are a service provider. And what makes the DSN special is it's specialized to communicate at high frequencies, high power, to very distant places. So our slogan is kind of listening to whispers from space, because you really are tuning into the smallest sounds. The customers that we have could be NASA projects. So like the rovers are used. We also service JAXA, the Japanese Space Organization, that I will tell you more about the trip later. And also ISRO, which is the Indian Space Agency, ESA, the European Space Agency. And now there's even more people getting into the space race, like the Korean Kari Space Agency and the Emirates Space Agency as well. And not only that, but even colleges now are building their own low-cost cube satellites.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And it's really opening up the technology to a lot of people, and the DSN. So very recently, up until recently, we've had to we would have had to not explain as much about the DSN and how to use it. We just send off some documents, and usually that organization is pretty familiar enough with their tools and usage.
Right.
But very recently, I've actually been helping like folks at JAXA build their own software for like new data types they've never used before. And I think that's really interesting because it's going to bring up all kinds of new science and technology that's accessible to everyone.
Totally. There's so much to dig into there. I did want to say that the listening to the whispers in space is such an awesome tagline. I'm like, is there a t-shirt with that on it?
T-shirt.
Like, Sirina is JPL like swag queen. Yes. So I was like, if there is one, she would know, and she'll help us get it. She also gave me one of the most epic tours of JPL's campus right outside of Pasadena once before. So yeah, you're the best JPL mascot.
Anytime.
But yeah, of course they have a t-shirt of it and poster and pins and all of that, I'm sure. I love what you're getting into as far as kind of making the data that you all collect more accessible. So would you guys consider it open source?
The data from the spacecrafts, it's up to the missions to make their information open source. So for example, all of the Earth orbiters that are NASA Earth orbiters that are collecting science about our ecosystem, that's actually data that's completely out there for anyone to use. And many have benefited from it already, including like early on the National Space Foundations before they had their own satellite system up there, as well as students using tracking data to see where all the different spacecrafts are. This very amazing outreach tool called Eyes on NASA was using spacecraft data, like locations of things that we talk to in the DSN, to pretty much map out where all the different spacecraft is. And a group of people put it together and made like a tool to zoom in and out and be able to click on missions and learn about them completely as an outreach tool. Yeah, so it's really up to the missions to make that data accessible, because in the end it's their data. What we do is we collect their data and send it off through our telemetry network that's at JPL in the dark room, if you remember. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So kind of depends on who owns the mission and what they want to do with it. But as far as what you were saying, helping, for example, the JAXA, which is the Japan Space Agency. Say it again. I don't know if I got it right.
So it's the Japanese Space Agency. I don't know what the A and X stands for.
I know. I was like, I feel like I'm missing some letters. So that's all right. No, we're good.
And interesting enough, JAXA is kind of like JPL, where they have their own sister institution, ISAS, that is a college institution, just like Caltech is to us.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And so, but what you were saying about helping them build their software to be able to read the data that you're sending, right? Yes. I'm like, maybe this is a dumb question, but just so I'm following correctly, the data you all collect from the antennas is dictated by the projects that you're supporting.
Correct.
So you would only send it if they're asking for specific metrics.
Correct. Maybe they'll have an instrument that's on at that time that they want to collect from.
Okay, got it. So that makes sense, because you're kind of just processing it for them and then sending it back to them, yes. And then helping support that process.
Yep. Okay. But what I'm doing with JAXA right now is the data that they are sending and receiving kind of goes through different paths. So whenever they are uplinking, meaning we're sending data to them, it's usually the project commanding the spacecraft to turn on its thrusters, to turn this instrument on or off, to maybe change its trajectory. And downlink data that we're receiving from the spacecraft could be maybe pictures that are coming down, spacecraft health, the battery levels, for example. Okay. So we do have our own software that we use internally into the DSN. It's existed for a really long time, so it's not open source, but it's kind of like again, a partnership of projects knowing how we're configured, and we know how they're configured, and making sure that in the end we can communicate on the ground. So once they're in space, they can depend on our network.
Makes sense. Okay. Thank you for breaking that down for me. Sure. I think that's really helpful and going to be helpful for our listeners. I do want to ask just how, what's it kind of like being a part of JPL, this NASA JPL, is such a famous kind of institution, right? And you're joking about fangirling for Design Lab, but I think that there's a lot of fans of NASA. And just was it surreal when you first started working there? Do you still feel ever wow, this is,
totally
such a historic, institution to be a part of? Or are you kind of
no, just totally. I think I'll always be a fangirl. Even my older coworkers tell me, "Oh, it'll wear off," but I'll always wear my stickers and my patches, and really sort of never forget how amazing this kind of stuff is. And it's funny that you say that, because I was having a conversation with someone earlier, being like, there's been other space agencies kind of use NASA as the product of all space things, even though NASA is made up of so many entities. Even JPL itself is sort of a whole different branch of NASA, right, because it's managed by Caltech. But I don't think I ever get up and go into work and not think about it's such a great place to work. It's so historic. Of course, every job at the end of the day kind of feels like a job.
Of course.
But as soon as I learned about JPL, I actually grew up in La Crescenta, so not too far from here. And I would go to the open houses when tickets were not required. So at that time, I think space wasn't as popular as it is now. I think people seeing all of the publicity around the rovers back in 2006 really started making all kinds of brands happen. Like Target has its own NASA gear, and so it's really interesting to see. But I think what gives me that feeling is, even though NASA isn't what it used to be in the 50s, in the Apollo age, we're already preparing for the next age, the Mars age. So I think it's different now, but it's also a new age of excitement for things that we haven't done before.
Totally, looking into kind of the future and the horizon of space. And like you said, the space race has all these new players within the last decade, I would say, right, that are getting making space research and projects more widespread and having diverse, like you said, new. Yeah, absolutely. Something that comes to mind when you're talking about kind of the future and the next generation of some of these projects and efforts. When we were talking earlier, is so interesting to me. You mentioned a project they're planning to, I forget which which project you're even talking about, but you're like, oh yeah, they're planning 8 years after this launch, they're going to do this thing. And has it changed like your perception of time kind of, or how you relate to time working on these projects and missions that are like, I don't know what, I'm curious, like what the longest timeline you're like focusing on right now, but that's like way bigger picture, I would say, than a lot of the stuff I work on a regular basis,
well, yeah,
you know?
No, me too. The Deep Space Network work comes actually after a mission's been built. But from working at JPL, I've realized and learned that when the idea is first proposed, it's usually an answer to the decadal survey that comes out every year from NASA that talks about all of the important stuff that that scientists think are valuable to understand. So for example, this year it was about small bodies, about asteroids. So a lot of proposals were written about possible missions that could study these asteroids and small bodies. And for example, DART is a mission that was redirecting an asteroid that launched this year. That kind of stuff, as soon as an idea is proposed, it takes about 10 years for them to go through the process of getting approved, the designs like looked over, and then for them to finally start building something. After something's been built, you go through testing for a couple of years maybe, and that's when the DSN comes in, and we make sure we're that our machines are, you know, communicating with their machines okay. And then even after that, if a mission is flying to somewhere like Saturn, it's going to take it another 7 years just to get there. Wow. You know?
Yeah.
So sometimes these timelines are long, and I do come in to a project where we launch something, it's a critical activity, and then we don't really think about the spacecraft because we're just tracking it daily for 2 years before it gets to its destination. Mm-hmm. But there's other missions, of course, that are like Artemis that just launched, which was a mission that was orbiting the moon. It's to prepare for future manned missions to the moon. And that was a great mission because it just, as planned, went to the moon, orbited, came back into the ocean, and then it ended. And I say it's nice because we have, again, over 40 missions that we track, so sometimes it can get overwhelming. But all kinds of timelines that are tied with the science that the mission's objective is meeting.
Absolutely. And so on that note, I think we can get into the trip to Japan. And you were... maybe just explain, you know, how it came about. You said it was kind of a last minute thing, but you were able to jump in and like make the most of it. So I'd love to hear kind of what was the reason for the trip, what you presented, and where, and with like which partners and that sort of thing.
Sure. I'm going to continue being a fangirl, but JPL is a really great place because although we have these amazing missions that are Mars and Venus centric, all these great efforts that go on, we also have services that kind of get looked over. So the Deep Space Network is a backbone of space exploration. So it's existed ever since we've been going to space, of course. And within that, there's a lot that goes on from, you know, actually building the antennas to building the software in the antennas to building the software that connects kind of the data servers to the antennas to the projects. And that's where I work. I interface between the antenna and the JPL servers onto the project. So there are 3 major different data types. Telemetry, which is just data coming from the spacecraft being downlinked. We're receiving the data. And then there's commanding. So you're commanding the spacecraft to, again, like turn on its thrusters or give some sort of status. And there's a third data type that is tracking, which is, again, like pinging the spacecraft to get location and Doppler effects of it. And those are the 3 that we advertise. Now, the DSN is growing like crazy. We went from 30 years ago, maybe tracking 10 spacecrafts to now over 40, which is nuts to think about. And we really are preparing for 10 years from now to have 100 spacecrafts to track.
Yeah.
There is a new kind of data that many users have already utilized that are from space agencies that are used to working with the DSN, like APL, Applied Physics Lab, or Goddard NASA centers, or other NASA centers. But monitor data is this really cool data that gives the status of the antennas. So projects will often be on a voice net with an operator that is pointing the antenna. Of course, not joysticking the antenna. That's how it used to be, where they literally would move the antenna. But of course, now it's all software powered. So the antennas have an ephemeris file that would track the motion of the spacecraft wherever it's going and continue on that path. And oftentimes a project will, see a problem with their data, get on the voice net, and ask what's our signal level, what's our power level, like what's wrong with the antenna, or what could we be expecting to do to help them plan out their tracking passes. But with monitor data, the projects could completely disregard and not use the operator, and be able to just look at a GUI to see the information about the antenna. We want users to be able to kind of work more efficiently. We don't want them to ask for someone's help and that person is already navigating 3 or 4 different other spacecrafts. So JAXA, being a space agency that we work with a lot, will utilize the monitor data on their mission called MMX, which is a Martian Moon Explorer. Really exciting. A return sample type of project where it'll travel to the moon Phobos, which is one of the 2 moons on Mars, and it'll collect samples and bring it back to Earth. So this is a really exciting mission. It'll probably be launching next year. And it's, as you can imagine, very high stakes for JAXA, because getting to the Mars is only something that landing on Mars is something that only the US has done. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty cool because with JAXA, I learned from our trip, it's a partnership. So we don't really pay them and they pay us. We trade services. So to help them expand on their missions and grow as a space agency, we'd like to help them utilize this type of monitor data. And in my limited years of experience, I've only been working for 5 years, but there are definitely some long timers there. I was able to gain enough knowledge about monitor data to use it and to support tests. And when the opportunity came about to go to JAXA and sort of sell monitor data to them, I got to go and give a presentation and answer questions that the team was having. So I'll be working closely with the MMX project from JAXA to start their testing and launch in a year.
I'm like, code for you're a badass that you got to go because you
amazing.
nailed it and got your shit together, and were able to present. So you're like, I've only been there 5 years, but but you made it happen, and that's why I got to go, and it's awesome. Yeah. And so I want to rewind a little bit to your educational background, and kind of, I think it would be interesting. I'm curious, and I also think for others who might be interested in getting into kind of space engineering and this sort of thing, what's like a day in the life of Sirina?
Okay, every day is different. Again, every job, no matter how cool, I think comes with its own boring tasks of developing documents, writing things down, having meetings. But I go back to my main task of translating project needs to DSN requirements. So I actively work on anywhere from 2 to 10 projects at a given time, depending on where the phase is of their mission. Recently, I've been mostly focused on developing configurations and needs for the missions really early on. So, for example, James Webb, which was last year, which is sort of when I've acquired the most knowledge, was years before they launched. They were doing compatibility testing, which is testing to pretty much prove that our antennas are compatible with their antenna that's on board their spacecraft. So my week can go from meeting with the project, figuring out game plans, to developing a test procedure to say that, hey, we've tested this and we're sure it's going to work once we send it off into space. Because once something is in space, it's a lot harder to troubleshoot it when it's not something you can put your hand on again. So testing, writing procedures, discussing requirements with projects, monitoring the kind of the tracking passes is what they call them. Once a project is on, could either be really boring, which is good, means everything is working right, or really exciting, which means things are breaking and we have to pinpoint where it happens. The cool thing about the project, the working in the DSN, is it's such a big machine. So one person, no matter how long they've been working in the Deep Space Network, isn't an expert on any one thing. You kind of have to be like a jack of all trades because you see how things can depend on each other, how a certain subsystem can be. So going back to the telemetry type of data, the downlink data that we get, again, those pictures and information about the spacecraft, they have to run through multiple subsystems to get to the project. So once the antenna receives the signal, it has to pass through a lot of like capture mechanisms to modulate the signal and translate it into something that's encoded for the project to decode. A lot can happen in between those steps. So sometimes our one of the subsystems will be a mess. So then now I'm learning from the experts about like, what does the system do? Why is it causing my project an issue? And pretty much becoming their friend so that I can really troubleshoot our problem. And then after that task is complete, now I've gained all that knowledge about this particular subsystem. Mm-hmm. So you never know what you're going to get, but it all kind of, again, is inspired by these missions doing great science.
Absolutely. So do you, like, you didn't necessarily plan to be working on DSN, right? When you first started at JPL, you said you started with, remind me, RF.
Yeah, RF Communications. A team called Mission Assurance, which kind of comes after a mission fails, and they do analysis on like what made it fail, stress test, artificial aging tests. Yep.
And now after being at JPL about 5 years, you said you're actually just about to start pursuing a master's, right? Or you've already begun?
I've already begun.
And what is the master's program?
The master's program is through Johns Hopkins. It's a professional engineering program, which means it's fully online, 10 classes, and it's really great because it's systems engineering but applied to spacecrafts. And I think that's the best way to learn because it's something that is that I can relate to in my mind, something that I work on. So each class is almost like a different department at JPL, which is awesome because the classes themselves are being taught by people at Applied Physics Lab through Johns Hopkins. So I've actually had a professor who was in one of my meetings for the DSN. Wow. She was also my professor. Yet she was also having meetings with the DSN, and I was talking to her on the professional side and then on the academic side.
Right. So kind of a small world in some ways, right? In a good way. And does this taking on this degree program, does it have to do with like goals you have as far as where you want to go at NASA JPL?
Yeah. The great thing again about JPL is that the way I learned about the Deep Space Network is as an intern. You know, I got whatever internship was most related to my research that I did in undergrad, which was minimal research, of course. But I got into the DSN because one day someone was organizing a tour for the interns, and we went up in the telecom building, and the guy that was showing us around the building was telling us about the Deep Space Network. So I had heard of it, and because of that tour, and I actually came back for another tour with a bigger group of friends because this guy was willing to share the knowledge and was excited to talk about his work. I applied for the DSN because I had heard about it, and in my interview I was able to be like, oh, I know what the Deep Space Network is.
Right.
So that's the great thing about JPL is someone that's excited to talk about your work, about their work, can have a contagious effect and make you excited about doing something. So I decided,
which is why you're the ultimate spokesperson for JPL. Yes.
I'll actually get an advertisement. Is this a commercial? I don't know. But The degree, I was encouraged to get to the degree, of course, because JPL pays for it, which is really nice.
Huge, yeah. And something I feel like so many, at least I didn't realize, until I feel like I got more into kind of some of the tech and engineering industry. But there's, we were talking about other colleagues and friends as well who've gotten kind of financial support for higher education through their employers, which is so awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely the encouraging factor. School is hard and sometimes unnecessary depending on your life goals, but JPL is an institution, because its ties with Caltech, I think really values education, and that's why it's one of the only places that offers more than $10,000 a year. So $10,000 a year is for free, so you could use that. You don't owe them anything. They'll pay up to $25,000 a year, so you could take up to 5 classes a year, which I don't know why anyone would do that. That'd be insane. I'm definitely not doing that. Yeah, the contract is staying at JPL for 2 years, which is nothing. And I also plan to be there.
Compared to other places. Yeah,
exactly. Yes. Yeah. The program is great, again, because it's space related. So it's not just some degree that I'm going to be taking classes and not knowing where it is,
where you're going to apply it and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And my job title technically is a systems engineer, not for a spacecraft, but one day I believe the degree can help, maybe write future proposals for a deep space network on the moon, maybe. Ooh, get a job on the moon. That's my future goals.
Nice.
And not that you asked, but there it is.
That was going to be my next question. So put it out there.
JPL, send me to the moon, please.
We're manifesting here. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it. You're like, all this travel experience around the world is actually just preparing me for intergalactic travel. No, it's not. That's wrong, right? I was like, intergalactic travel, interspace travel. What's
interplanetary.
I was like, interplanetary. There we go.
I wish intergalactic. We need some sort of supersonic speed. Yeah, once we figure it out. Yes.
I'm getting too far in the sci-fi vocab there.
Oh, I love sci-fi.
Does that kind of come with its territory? Like, does everyone at JPL, are they
some nerds?
Sci-fi space nerds?
Oh yeah, there's some nerds. Some Slack channels are like dedicated to the craziest stuff. There's a Party Parrot Slack channel. There's a Star Trek channel. There's a Star Wars channel that's not related to the Star Trek one.
Very different.
Very different. They don't talk to each other. You're either on this one or that one. But yeah, lots of all kinds of diverse nerds, and I say nerds in like the most beloved sense, because it's people who are excited about
that's
really
what I
cool
think.
technology.
Like, everyone is a nerd about something.
Yes.
I think it's literally just means you're passionate about something.
Definitely.
So you're nerding out about it. Totally. And it's not all like sci-fi fans and data analysis. There's also softball team, which I was invited to sub on a couple times, which was fun. And it looks like you guys have just all kinds of fun work events I see on Instagram all the time, fun multicultural days and celebrations and all of that stuff. So not to like make this too much of a plug for JPL, but it does seem like a pretty cool place to work into.
Yeah. Especially when the interns come around too. We have like a summer games that we prepare for. It's called the Beach Olympics, where everyone kind of prepares for a sport and goes out to the beach for a day and competes.
Epic.
It's intense.
Love that. No, that's really important, I think, especially when you guys are doing such like serious, impactful work all the time. I think it speaks to like that balance you kind of need, right?
Definitely. I was just talking to my group, and we were talking about how important it is to have like companionship when you're working. So even though you're working on something extremely technical, having companionship from hanging out with your coworkers or doing something social or just being close to them makes you comfortable enough to share ideas and ask questions without feeling like it's not your place.
Totally. No, that's so important, and something I value about Supplyframe too, that like they make time for both, like all the work and all the time to be like creative and have fun together. And like you said, kind of build those relationships with your coworkers and all of that.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd love to get into kind of what you're excited about, other than, going to the moon eventually. What you're excited about for sort of the future of JPL's projects, but even beyond that, kind of what you see as far as trends in, in space research and kind of the science that you all are working on.
Yeah. So we talked about the new space age, and the Apollo age came with its own crazy events that everyone saw that was inspired a whole generation to go into space and even military operations. But what I think is really cool about this new space age is all of the commercial collaboration. So Mars sample return is our next big mission. We just started sort of building requirements for that mission. Requirements are still being changed every single day. For example, the helicopter that was launched a couple of years ago with the Perseverance rover was a proof of concept, just making us believe that we can fly on the moons, on Mars with such low density. But Mars sample return is a series of 4 different components, 4 different projects really, of an orbiter, a lander, the rocket to actually bring the samples back up to orbit, and all these moving pieces. That it's going to be a massive project. I mean, it's not launching for another 10 years, but things are already starting to happen.
I still can't wrap my head around those kinds of like projects. Like, yeah,
it'll be here before you know it.
In some ways, yes, it will. I mean, this year alone was just flew by.
Seriously, yeah. But I'm really excited for that mission because of all of the partners that are being announced. Blue Origin, Honeybee Robotics, which is right down the street. They make all the drills for the samplers. So all kinds of projects are commercial-based projects are popping up in collaboration and making it more financially sound, less risky, and just having more eyes on the mission instead of it just being a government-based organization. Because again, what I really do hope to do, and I see myself at JPL for a very long time, but I hope my career ends with building my own company that is a space exploration type company that's helping, put the next orbiter on, or building the next Las Vegas on the moon, something like that.
That's so cool. I had no idea that those were kind of your aspirations. Yeah. That's great to hear. I'm like, keep putting it out there. Absolutely.
Thanks, Magenta.
You can definitely make that happen. I have no doubt. And recruit me onto the team eventually.
Yes, you're in.
Just like shake hands.
It's on camera now, on the record.
Yeah, everyone saw that. I'll be your number 3 employee. I'm like, Sarah, Matthew, I'll be up there.
Yeah, definitely up there. Top 5 for sure.
Nice. Everyone heard that right? Yeah. Love it. We'll do the podcast on the moon.
Yeah, follow up 10 years later, 20 years, 30 years later.
Yep. Yeah, I'm hoping we can do a follow up with Janelle, maybe in Japan if we can make it happen.
That would be cool. That would be awesome.
So I want to be respectful of our time here. I know we got to wrap it up soon. So just a couple last questions. We always ask our guests, what's on your personal bill of materials? And you can interpret that however you want. People have interpreted it all different ways. So there's no right way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. I think my bill of materials is definitely related to plane tickets, a warm jacket, and a good friend to travel with.
Perfect. I'm like, add me to the list.
Yes, definitely.
The travel companion list. Absolutely. No, I think that sums it up very nicely. And I'm super excited for the future of Sirina Space Enterprises.
Oh, I like that name. Okay, they're getting it patented right now.
Yeah, you'll have to pay me $5 for it, but no. Take me on one trip and then it's yours. Done. But yeah, thank you so much, Sirina. You're such an awesome just advocate for getting more people, I think, involved in engineering, getting introduced to JPL and falling in love with it through tours, through all of the outreach events and stuff that you promote, and through just the way that you speak about your work. You can tell that it really is important to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Thank you, Magenta.
Thank you, Sirina, for sharing your knowledge on deep space communication. I, for one, can't wait to see what the future holds for space exploration. Once again, thank you for listening. I'm Magenta, and this is The Bomb. If you like The Bomb, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Supplyframe and Hackaday on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Design Lab at Supplyframe Design Lab on Instagram and Twitter. The Bomb is a Supplyframe podcast produced by me, Magenta Strongheart, and Ryan Tillotson. Written by Maggie Bowles and edited by Daniel Ferreira. Theme music is by Anna Hogbin, show art by Thomas Schneider. Special thanks to Giovanni Salinas, Bruce Dominguez, Thomas Woodward, Jin Kumar, Jordan Clark, the entire Supplyframe team, and you, our wonderful listeners. I'm your host, Magenta Strongheart. See you next week.